I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in The Stream. Today, how important is Christianity in the U.S. presidential race? We look at the role of religion in U.S. politics. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is in Tampa Bay, Florida, where she and members of our team are covering the Republican National Convention. So she's going to be bringing your live feedback into our show from there. Hey, Malika.
Hey, Lisa.
So, religion, it's always been a factor in U.S. politics, yet the numbers and the statistics by the Pew Forum show that many Americans really have quite limited knowledge about the faith of Obama and Romney. How's our community weighing in on this?
Well, Lisa, we asked our community whether they think religion will play a significant role in this election, and specifically Christianity. Of course, there were a wide range of responses. Some said yes, others said other policy issues will be more important. But of course, we'd like to know what our community thinks of this. So tweet us, join the conversation, use the hashtag AJStream.
We got Malika to music today. It's a new one. Today we're joined by two guests in studio. To my left is Rob Boston, a senior analyst at the nonprofit Americans United for Separation of Church and State organization. And across the table to Rob's left is Michael Cromarty. He is the vice president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Rob, Michael, welcome to the stream.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Glad to have you guys here. I'd also like to welcome our Google Plus panel, which you can see behind me. We're going to get to your guys' comments and questions in a bit, but for those of you who want to join our next live hangout, make sure you add us to your circles. And to do that, go to plus.google.com and then search for the stream.
Hi, I'm Dr. Charles Ferguson. I'm president of the Federation of American Scientists, and I'm in the stream.
And I think to myself, if I'm willing to give something up as somebody who's been extraordinarily blessed, and give up some of the tax breaks that I enjoy, I actually think that's going to make economic sense. But for me as a Christian, it also coincides with Jesus' teaching that for unto whom much is given, much shall be required.
Our nation was founded on the principle of, in some respects, of religious tolerance and liberty in this land, and so we welcome people of other faiths, and I happen to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and my Savior, but I know other people have differing views, and I respect those views and don't believe those qualify or disqualify people for leadership in our nation.
So how does religion factor into U.S. politics? A majority of U.S. voters tend to believe that it is very important or somewhat important for presidential candidates to have strong religious beliefs. But according to a recent Pew survey, many Americans have limited knowledge about the faith of President Barack Obama and former Governor Mitt Romney. The survey actually found that 32% don't know that Romney is a Mormon and 9% think he belongs to another faith. And when it comes to Obama, only 49% identify him as Christian, and a good number believe that he's Muslim. Now, for the most part, both candidates have avoided getting into the specifics of their faith or making their beliefs a focal point in the race. But when asked directly, Obama and Romney assure skeptics that their beliefs are in line with Christianity. So what role does the faith of a presidential candidate play in winning the election? And that is the question that I want to start the show with and pose to both of you. Rob, what role does it play?
Well, it's always been a really delicate issue in this country. I think if you look at the American population right now, what they're saying is they like their candidates to be men and women of faith. But if a candidate gets too closely associated with a movement that the American people think is going to impose religion or base a lot of public policy on religion or a certain definition of religion, they get a little bit nervous.
Michael, how about you? What role does it play?
Well, I agree with Rob on that. In fact, I think what most Americans want is in that Pew survey you cited, it says over 75% of Americans want their president to be a person of faith. Mm-hmm. What I've always found interesting about that survey is they don't care what kind. They want it to be a person of faith, but they don't say we want it to be a certain kind of Christian, a Protestant, or a Catholic. They just say a person of faith and never define that. So
maybe defining more about morals and ethics than
exactly.
really the religion
That's
itself?
Right. They want their faith to be something that informs their worldview. And that when they come to the public square, that their beliefs are grounded in something transcendent from their own autonomous self. So I agree with Rob that Americans want their presidents and their political candidates to be people of faith, but they want it to be a non-sectarian faith. Now, by the way, when a candidate has really got a history of being a strong Southern Baptist or a strong Catholic, they actually have to tone that down and speak in more public religious language so that they don't come across as pushing a specific faith.
In this country, I think, as opposed to, say, Western Europe, the idea of religion has always been linked to morals. In other words, religion is a guarantor of moral behavior. That's why if you look at the opinion polling data, the one group that doesn't poll well are the non-believers. People say they're willing to vote for a Catholic, they're willing to vote for a Jew, they'll vote for a Protestant, they'll even vote for a Mormon, as we're seeing now. But the atheists, there are still people saying, oh, we're not so sure about that.
Well, you know, in a recent interview with Washington National Cathedral Age magazine, both Romney and Obama opened up about their role of faith in their personal and in their public lives. And when asked about public questioning of the sincerity of their Christianity, this is what they had to say. President Obama said, "There's not much I can do about it. I have a job to do as president, and that does not involve convincing folks that my faith in Jesus is legitimate and real." And former Governor Romney said, "I am often asked about my faith and my beliefs about Jesus Christ. I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of mankind. Every religion has its own unique doctrines and history. These should not be bases for criticism, but rather a test of our tolerance." So why are both of these candidates having to convince the public that they are in line with the ideals of Christianity? Rob?
Well, I think in Obama's case, you simply have this movement of individuals on the extreme far right that have been spreading these rumors that he's not a true Christian, that he is a Muslim. And what amazes me is the large numbers of people in the population who believe this stuff. I mean, I don't know what more Obama can do to convince people that he is a Christian. He's been a member of the United Church of Christ for a long time. He's talked about his faith profession. He's discussed it from the heart. There's some people just aren't going to be convinced because they don't like the guy. Romney's a more interesting case. During the primaries, there was some talk from, again, the far right, that they didn't like Mormonism, that they didn't really consider that a Christian denomination. You know, it's one of our newer religions, sort of late 19th century. It has its own books. It recognizes the Bible, but then it has its own texts that it sometimes will put alongside that. So some people were concerned about that. But Romney seems to have done a pretty good job deflecting that, and I think by and large many of the religious conservatives are so interested in seeing Obama out of office that they're willing to put the Mormon question aside and vote for him.
I think we're going to let Malika
feedback here. There's a tweet here from Matt who says, "We need to do what our founding fathers wanted, separation of church and state." There's another tweet that I'll pull up on my screen now from Senator Rahim who says, "Americans may not be attending church, synagogue, temple, mosque regularly, but religious values still guide many people's lives." Now with that, I'd like to go to Google Plus, where Tim King is speaking to us from Washington, D.C., and Tim is the Chief Communications Officer at Sojourners. It's a national Christian organization. Tim, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I am really interested to hear about the candidates' faith and their personal stories, because that's so much of what has made me who I am and what I prioritize in my life, what I care about, that I also want to hear about that from the candidates. Faith and religion is something that shapes people's moral compass and their priorities. But that also doesn't mean, for me, I wouldn't limit myself. I come from an evangelical Christian tradition, but that doesn't mean I would limit myself to voting for an evangelical Christian, or that even I identify most with evangelical Christian politicians. Sometimes there are politicians who might have no faith or a different faith that I find myself much more in line with. But I think since a president and any politician isn't running just on a kind of cold set of policy positions, but they're also painting a moral vision for the future of our country, it's really important for them to be able to articulate their faith and how that has influenced them and how that will influence how they govern.
Well, Rob, would you like to tackle that? Are these candidates painting a moral picture?
They are, but there's a danger in that. We have to remember that this is a nation of more than 300 million people with every possible faith perspective being represented, from extremely conservative Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Buddhism, all the way to atheism and secular humanism and everything in between. And a politician has to represent all of those people. So public policy should be based on the public good. Now, that isn't to say that a candidate shouldn't have a faith or can't talk about it, but they must understand that we're not a theocracy, that the Constitution does not establish us as an officially Christian nation. We're a secular democracy, secular republic, and the politicians need to keep that in mind. If they go too far, I think there will be a bit of a backlash from the voters.
You know, we are learning today that Mitt Romney's speech tomorrow night is going to actually do a bit of a strategy shift, and he's going to talk about his Mormonism. He's going to really publicly embrace it, perhaps for the first time in a big way during this campaign. Michael, I want you to talk about that a little bit. Why do you think he's going to do that? Why is that important at this stage in the game?
Well, because I agree with what Tim King of Sojourners just said, which that he knows that most people want to know about the candidate's faith. And Romney, because of the controversy of being a Mormon, has avoided it. But I think his advisors have wisely said, you don't have to get into the details and doctrines of the Mormon beliefs, but you can, Governor, tell people how those beliefs have motivated you to acts of altruism and compassion. And Romney has a real story of real decency, of caring for people, that's only been coming out in the last few months. If what he does in that speech is not talk about Joseph Smith or the particular doctrines of the Church of Latter-day Saints, but how those doctrines motivate him to love his neighbor, then it'll humanize him more, and people say he's a man of faith. It motivates him to do charitable works, and so that's all to the good. By the way, I wanted to go back to what Rob was mentioning about what can the president do. I, for the life of me, do not understand why President Obama does not spend more time publicly, visibly going to church. I mean, if I was an Obama advisor, I'd say, Mr. President, we need to see you all going to church more. I mean, I agree with you. Some people are just crazy.
Well, I understand that unchurched Christians is the largest block of Christians that's growing at this point, and he seems to be one of them. So is he actually sort of reflecting what's going on in America?
I think he is in many ways. I call that do-it-yourself spirituality. It's a growing movement in this country. People saying, I'm spiritual but not religious, or I believe in some of the doctrines of Christianity but not others, or I can't find the church that really fits my particular beliefs. Obama isn't doing anything radical by embracing a view like that. That is an increasingly popular perspective among Americans.
All right, I want to get some more perspective in here from our Google Hangout. Malika?
Well, Michael, I think you just raised an interesting point, and you said you wondered why Obama has not made a more public showing of going to church. There's a tweet here from Frances Von Doom. She says, Romney nor Obama have tried to make their religions be their talking points. It's the media and the electorate that just keep bringing it up. With that, I'd like to go to Google Plus, because Rosalie is there. She's a student, and Rosalie has a question. Go ahead, Rosalie.
Sure. I think that in a lot of the coverage around this campaign has been focused on social issues like women's rights and a lot of discussion about ethics and what that means. And I think that sometimes Christian ethics and American ethics either get confused with each other or are used synonymously with each other. And my question is to the guests, what differentiates those two? Is there a difference?
Rob, you want to grab that?
Yeah, actually that's a very good question, because it's something that I think we've grappled with in this nation for a long time. We have made great strides in tolerance. There was a time in the 19th century, late 19th century, where Roman Catholics couldn't get certain jobs, and there were even violence in some cities between Catholics and Protestants. And we all know about the anti-Semitism that plagued this nation for a long time. We're seeing a wave of anti-Islamic activity in some parts of the country now. But I think we're going to get over all that because we have a grand history of tolerance. The last step to take will be to understand that ethics, morality, and decency can be grounded in religion, but they can be grounded in secular philosophies as well. And that just because you don't have a particular religious belief doesn't mean you're a bad person. When we get over that, as the commentator mentioned, I think we'll have the last piece of tolerance in place.
Well, it goes to the point of there's a little bit of a blurring of the lines. I want to read something to you guys. This is Ross Douthat wrote this. He makes the argument in his new book, Bad Religion, How We Became a Nation of Heretics. And then he also wrote about it in a New York Times op-ed not too long ago. He says, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney, and Rick Santorum all identify as Christians, but their theological traditions and personal experiences of faith diverge more starkly than any group of presidential contenders in recent memory. These divergences reflect America as it actually is. We're neither traditionally Christian nor straightforwardly secular. Instead, we're a nation of heretics in which most people still associate themselves with Christianity, but revise its doctrine as they see fit. And nobody can agree on even the most basic definitions of what Christian faith should mean. Michael, what do you think of that?
Well, I've read the book, and I'm a great admirer of Ross Douthat's writing on that. Yeah, I mean, I think the point that he's making there is that we are a nation of diverse, we are people who claim certain beliefs, but we have diverse opinions about how to interpret and how to apply those beliefs to public life and to public policy. And so, as Rob was suggesting, and I agree, that our understanding of tolerance grows out of a theological conviction that we all need to have what one commentator calls more epistemological modesty. That when we come to these questions, we have certain convictions, But when we try to prudently work out what the policy implications are, we need to be a little more civil and a little more modest about our posture in making those arguments.
All right, let's hear a little bit more from our community. Malika?
Well, there's two interesting tweets here that just popped up, Lisa. There's one from Vince, who says, in 2012, it's imperative that a Christian becomes the president of the USA because other religions bring fear to most people. And there's one more, it's an interesting sentiment from Rainier, who says, so Americans want a president of faith, but what if the faith is Hindu or Islam? Let's ponder that over, but while we do, let's go to Google Plus, where Lewis is standing by, and Lewis calls himself an atheist, and he's speaking to us from Stanford, California. Lewis, go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, do you think we should trust politicians' religious claims? It seems like religion has always been an easy way to pander and to try to identify with voters, but it doesn't really get to the policy issues that are what politicians are really going to be governing on.
Rob, do you want to tackle that one?
Yes, that's actually always a concern, that political leaders will sort of pander or tell voters what they want to hear. And I think that is unfortunately a byproduct of this insistence that so many people have in this country that candidates talk about their religion. I mean, think about some of the recent candidates we've had that are a little more secular, like Howard Dean and Bill Bradley, who really weren't comfortable always talking about their religion. And Howard Dean actually said some things about religion that indicated that his knowledge of it may not have been that strong. Well, those individuals may still have brought good things to bring to us politically, but because they weren't comfortable talking about religion, and there were other reasons maybe why they didn't do so well, but that was part of it. And I think that's unfortunate. There's a section of our Constitution, Article 6, that says there shall be no religious test for public office. But sometimes I think the American people seem to have imposed one anyway, that you at least have to be a believer and you've got to be willing to at least wear your religion a little bit on your sleeve, and that I think is unfortunate.
And here, could I just add quickly to that, Lisa? Here's the key point. If you're a presidential candidate and you don't have a faith, but then you try to fake one, people can see right through it.
But do they see through presidential candidates adapting their faith? For example, Barack Obama didn't fare very well when everything came out about the Reverend Right and black liberation. Mitt Romney may not fare very well if things come out in a more mainstream way about Joseph Smith identifying the real Christianity, which is just for Mormonism. Do people
Here's my
plug into
point.
that?
I think we'll hear from Romney's speech tomorrow night. It's that when people talk about they have a certain faith conviction, we look at their biography and see what implications it's had in their past, and from there try to project their future. Romney actually has a biography that's quite compelling and impressive. I know he doesn't like to talk about it. He thinks it's egocentric for him to do that. But I think he's going to find a way, I suspect he's going to find a way tomorrow night to tell some of how that faith affects the way he sees public life and care for the neighbor. So I think Lewis asked a very important question that we ought to at least try to find out if those religious claims are authentic and real, or are they just saying, I read a Pew poll and I think I need to tell people I used to go to church or something. It won't work.
Right. Malika?
Well, there's a tweet here from Free Thinking Kenya who says Americans are just hung up on fascinations, whether it's religion, tax returns, or birth certificates. But there's another one here that I'd like to pose to you, Rob, and it's actually tweeted specifically to you. Alexandra says, how could a secular morality actually emerge in the U.S.? Even individual policy issues are steeped in religion.
Well, I think that's something that will happen over time. Michael may disagree with me about this, but I think the long-term trends in this country are toward, not that we would be as secular as Western Europe, but that more and more people, as I said, will adopt this sort of do-it-yourself spirituality, and that's going to have an impact on some of these so-called culture war issues that we're often grappling with as a country. That's not going to be something we're going to see for quite a while, but at some point in the future, I do think that we will see the emergence of a serious secular ethic that begins to give Christianity a serious run for its money.
Does this mean, Michael, that it's less about the particular religion and more about issues that are typically associated with religious beliefs, like abortion or gay marriage?
Yes, precisely. And by the way, I agree with Rob on this. In fact, I think we're there already. There's one commentator who calls this belief system flexodoxy. People, I like a little bit of authority,
I like that.
but I don't want.
Leave it to Americans to adapt it to whatever their need may be at the time.
It's kind of a meism religion. It's for the self is the final authority, and that's not a good trend. But to your question, Yes, I think that when these social and cultural issues of great moment come up, whatever your view is on these questions, it does help a candidate to tie it to a deeper framework that's rooted in some sort of religious sensibility. Simply because most Americans, all polling data shows us, are religious people of one kind or the other. And so I think when a candidate can say, I believe this because I think the dignity of the human person is rooted in their being made in the image of God, and therefore we ought to treat people with certain kind of respect and dignity because of it, then I think that grounding only helps them.
We do keep talking about religions and we do keep talking about being a person of faith, but kind of getting back to the beginning of the show, you know, both candidates are clearly identifying themselves or trying to identify themselves with voters as Christians specifically. Why specifically Christianity?
Well, in Romney's case, I think that he's trying to convince a broad public of Christians that as a Mormon, he is a Christian. And he's just urgent to do that. I've seen in many interview shows in the last week or two to say, you know, Jesus Christ is my personal Savior. And of course, in Obama's case, as Rob mentioned, we do have a lot of wackos out there who don't know that he's a Christian, still think he's a Muslim. And as I suggested earlier on the program, if I was advising the president, I'd say we need to find some way to get you and the First Lady out to church in public so we can disabuse this kind of public of thinking that, because it's not fair to believe somebody is something that they have said over and over again they're not.
So Rob, as secular as we talk about America becoming and as different as the opinions are, is it still important to identify yourself as a Christian in America when you're running for president?
Well, really it depends. I think if you're seeking national office, it doesn't hurt. The only exception to that would be if you are really closely identified with some fairly extreme positions. I mean, look at some of the candidates that were running. Michelle Bachmann,
I'm going to have to stop you there. We are out of time. We're going to pick it up right there in our post-show, though, in just a few minutes. So hold your thought. We first, though, need to look at a particular lead that Malika happened to round up earlier today at the RNC.
The Republican National Convention is officially underway, and one thing we've been tracking is the online conversation about the party's appeal among minority groups. Now, lots of people are talking about a recent NBC Wall Street Journal poll that suggests Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney has 0% support among African American voters. Now, that's a sentiment that's being carried out throughout this week's convention. There's a tweet here from Rebecca Sokol who says, you can count the number of brown/black people at the RNC on one hand. Hashtag RNC 2012. Well, we wanted to get the perspective from within the party.
The idea for my blog, conservativeblackchick.com, came from the notion that all blacks have to have one political ideology, and that is Democrats. Many people assume that if you're black, you're Democrat. I was very frustrated with that perception, so I wanted people to know up front what they were getting into, that I was conservative, I'm a black woman, and that's the end of that. I think the mainstream media thinks that being black and a conservative are incongruent things, if you will, that they're, yes, at odds with one another, that somehow a black person can't be a Republican, when in fact it was the Republican Party that freed the slaves under President Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation. It was the Republican Party that passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And the first 70 years of the party, blacks actually voted Republican.
I immigrated 23 years ago. I'm the first immigrant to make the Virginia House of Delegates since the early 1600s, when there was the House of Burgesses. In the past 22 years, I've been involved in Republican politics in Virginia and on nationwide and in Arab American Republican politics. I think the party is a big tent, regardless of what you're hearing in the media and regardless of some members of the party, they don't speak for the party. The party is a big tent. I'm an example of that.
Well, this is a conversation that will continue until the election in November, and we'll continue tracking it. Back to you, Lisa.
All right, and stay with us because the post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. Now, on Thursday, we tackle the foreign policies of the presidential candidates and how they may impact people around the world. So tweet us your thoughts on that. Go to our website, send us a video question. And until then, we'll see you online. Welcome back to the Streams Online Post Show. We're talking about the importance of Christianity in the presidential race. Rob, I want to pick up with you because we were talking about, as secular as some believe this nation is becoming, there's still a very concerted effort on the part of both candidates to convince Americans that they truly are Christians, and what that translates to.
Right. I think that what that means politically is that the candidates, at least for the near future, are going to continue to stress their religious beliefs, but in a sort of broad and general way. Candidates who tend to be tied to what voters perceive as kind of extreme religious political movements, Michelle Bachmann, Rick Santorum, and so on, I just don't think are going to be viable on the national stage because people get the impression they're going to impose their religion or use the political process to impose a faith, and that makes voters uncomfortable.
Malika, let's get back to our Google Hangout.
Yeah, I'd like to go to Ben, who's speaking to us from Utah. Ben, go ahead. Looks like we just lost the Hangout, actually. But there's a cynical tweet here that I'd like to read. I'll pull up on my screen. It's from Buddha Satava, and she says, new religion might be capitalism more than Christianity and Islam and the Mormon faith, and it might be inconsequential in this race. So a look at capitalism. But I'd like to go to Google Plus because it looks like we have it back up. Ben, can you hear us?
Yes.
Go ahead with your question.
I was just wondering why sometimes we have a contradiction in logic in thinking that we shouldn't vote for someone based on their obscure or less predominant religion. But, for example, I might not necessarily support Romney, even though I am a member of the LDS Church. It's the same logic to think that I shouldn't vote for someone as I should because he's Christian or whether he has the same values as I do. The reason we should vote for someone should be based on our political ideology and the policy decisions that they seem to have portrayed in their past experiences and in the campaign.
I had a little bit of trouble understanding. Did you guys?
I got it.
Okay.
I got it, and I agree with Ben, actually. Ben is saying just because I'm a member of the LDS Church doesn't mean I should vote for Governor Romney, and that our political philosophy and worldview ought to inform what we think more than our personal faith. I actually agree with that. I mean, in fact, a lot of people on the Christian right used to say when a Christian right candidate would run, like Gary Bauer or Pat Robertson, well, you're going to vote for him. And many people on the political conservative question say, well, no, it depends. I don't think A, he's not competent, B, he's a wacko, and C, just because I agree with some of his theology doesn't mean I'm going to vote for them. So, I mean, on both sides, on the liberal left side and the conservative right side, a person they say they're a person of a certain faith, but if their policies are totally different from your own, you have no obligation to vote for them for that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, actually. And also, too, I would add, I think people in this country are sophisticated enough to sort of judge people by their actions. I think about Newt Gingrich, for example, who I've heard speak several times at some of the conservative meetings I've been to reporting and writing about. Personally, I'm really offended by being lectured on morality by Newt Gingrich, and I think a lot of people feel the same way in this country. So this attempt to kind of use religion and wrap himself in that cloak of that, people just see through that. They make their decisions on the basis of public policy and sometimes actions that they can perceive to be inconsistent with the faith these people are claiming to
And Rob makes a very important point here. The American people do agree with you on that, and in fact, we saw how Newt ended up imploding. Right. It was just a temporary blip with him, and I think people saw through some of him. Not that his own faith now might not be new and real, but his past actions give every indication of him being an unstable person.
What about something or someone that the U.S. is completely unaccustomed to? Let's say it were a Hindu candidate or a Muslim candidate. How likely would Americans be to vote somebody like that into a presidential office?
Well, I think for presidency that would be a little bit tough right now. There are some examples of that for Congress. We have at least one Muslim in Congress. I think at least one Buddhist right now. And even Pete Stark of California said he was the lone member of Congress who doesn't have a belief in God. So there is some diversity there. On the national stage, the polls do show people say, oh yes, I would vote for a Jew, I would vote for a Muslim, I would vote for a Buddhist, I would vote for a Hindu. But the percentages are not much above 50% in some cases.
But much more likely to vote for someone like that than an atheist, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think of those religions, a Jewish candidate would have the best chance.
Right. Malika?
Yep.
Well, there's two tweets here that kind of sum up the divide among our community. Sana Rahim says, there's a common misconception that we live in a world where religion is disappearing and becoming irrelevant. U.S. elections prove that's false. But then on the other side, there's one from Sally Eastman who says, you must understand that most Americans are not really religious anymore. It's a cultural afterthought. We are secular. Thought I'd like to go to Rosalie and Google Plus, who has a follow-up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I've noticed that the rhetoric surrounding the influence of faith in politics, especially presidential politics, is obviously on the rise in media. And how much do you think that comes from the media, and how much of it actually comes from voter interest?
Rob, I'll throw that one to you.
Yes, that's a very good question. I do think there's genuine interest among the American population about these questions. But I also do sometimes think that the media does tend to inflate these things, maybe more than the average American is concerned about them, especially in the case of Mitt Romney, since we're talking about the first Mormon on a major ticket to run for president. A little known fact, Joseph Smith actually sought the presidency under a political party he created called the Church and State Party, which didn't do very well. But Mitt Romney's the first one to really get a major political nomination. So there's some interest in that among the media. But as we talked about earlier, a shocking percentage of the American people don't even know that Mitt Romney's a Mormon.
And 81%, according to some new Pew research, don't care. Don't know or don't care. So I see you.
Well, yeah, don't care. But again, the same Pew research that said that also said that they do care that they be a person of faith, as I mentioned earlier. And so it is shocking that people would not know that Governor Romney.
How can they not know that?
How can they not know that? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. By the way, I think though by October they will know that.
I think after Thursday night they will know that. Malika, let's get one more person in from our Google Hangout.
Let's go straight to Tim, who has a question. Go ahead.
Hey, I'd like to ask about religious liberty. It's something that came up earlier this year, specifically around an HHS mandate concerning contraception and what institutions would have to do that and what institutions wouldn't, and a lot of complicated stuff as far as self-insured plans versus other plans. And since then, there's been an uproar around what some have called President Obama having a war on religion. But I've been surprised to see that when I look around at our religious milieu today, the groups that I continue to see most persecuted in our country are Muslims, in which there's lawsuits in Tennessee that blocked the building of a mosque, the opening of a mosque for 2 years. There's been a rash of violence in Chicago. Could you speak to what the role and what the conversation around religious liberty will be for the rest of the election?
How about both of you guys answer that, and then we're going to wrap up the show.
Well, you work for a religious liberty organization, so.
Well, I do think that we have some challenges right now. I alluded to that earlier, especially with the Islamic groups and some of the things that are going on. I'm shocked that there are Americans who actually believe they can go to court and stop Muslims from building a mosque. That is completely counter to our great tradition of religious liberty. If groups are living in peace, they have absolutely the same First Amendment rights as everybody else. We are having some difficulties about some of these political questions. The person alluded to the HHS mandate and how far we can go with that. But the basic principle of religious liberty, I think, is sound and will be sound, and I think the courts will continue to apply it that way, and that's why I think we'll kind of get over some of these rough patches we're hitting right now.
I agree with Rob on that, and I just want to say that whatever one thinks about the HHS mandate, the issue of religious liberty and religious freedom in this country is now front and center, and I think that's all to the good.
All right. Our thanks to Rob Boston, Michael Cromartie, everyone in our Google Hangout, our digital producer Malika Bilal coming to us from Tampa. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. Now on Thursday, we're going to tackle the foreign policies of the presidential candidates and how they may impact people around the world. So tweet us your comments and your questions on that. And until then, we'll see you online.